Most men pass through life unnoticed. They are agreeable, predictable, easy to place. They have learned how to soften themselves until nothing sharp remains. They enter a room and nothing changes. Their words dissolve into noise. Their anger carries no weight. Their presence leaves no imprint. And then there is the other type. You have felt him before you understood him. The atmosphere shifts when he arrives, not because he demands attention, but because something in him refuses to bend. He does not raise his voice. He does not explain himself. He does not compete for approval. And yet, people listen, not out of admiration, out of instinct. Long before modern psychology gave this phenomenon a name, power already understood it. Some men are shaped to be harmless. Others are shaped by pressure. History was never written for the harmless. If you are here, it is not because you want to be liked. It is because something inside you has begun to change, and you are not sure whether to resist it or follow it. You may feel colder than before, less apologetic, less eager to smooth tension or manage emotions that are not your responsibility. This unsettles you. You wonder if you are becoming distant Krellin. Unrecognizable, you are told that restraint is virtue, that softness is morality, that danger is something to be erased. But this is not how power has ever worked. There is a difference between violence and danger. Violence is impulsive, reactive, uncontrolled. It is the final act of a man who has lost command of himself. Danger is something else entirely. Danger is silent, measured, contained. It is the capacity to act, paired with the discipline not to act unnecessarily. A man like this cannot be bullied, shamed, or guilted into submission. He does not flinch when pressure is applied. He does not outsource his identity to the approval of others, because he knows who he is, and that knowledge makes him difficult to control. The world prefers men who are manageable, who trade their instincts for comfort, who mistake politeness for strength. But history rewards a different archetype, the one who can look at reality without illusions, who understands that moral performance is not the same as moral agency, who knows that goodness without the capacity for force is not virtue, it is compliance. You may feel as if an old version of yourself is dissolving, the one who avoided conflict at all costs, the one who believed being agreeable was the same as being respected. That version is dying. Transformation is not gentle. It removes layers that once kept you socially safe. It replaces familiarity with clarity, and clarity is dangerous. What you are experiencing is not corruption. It is awakening. There is an ancient word for this shift, not goodness in the sentimental sense, but effectiveness, the ability to shape outcomes, the skill to impose direction on chaos. Power does not belong to the loudest man. It belongs to the most grounded one. What follows is not self-improvement. It is not a collection of habits. It is a diagnosis, a set of signs that indicate you are crossing a threshold few are willing to approach, a movement away from harmlessness and toward sovereignty. There is, however, a cost, a final realization that only reveals itself once the transformation is nearly complete, a price most men refuse to pay. That price will come at the end. For now, watch yourself carefully. If these signs feel familiar, it is because they are already happening. The earliest sign is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself with confidence or triumph. It arrives as discomfort. You begin to notice that being liked no longer feels rewarding. Approval starts to feel hollow. The old reflexed smooth tension to be agreeable, to sacrifice your position for harmony, no longer activates the way it used to. For most of your life, you were trained into a simple equation. Be pleasant, and you will be safe. Be accommodating, and you will be accepted. Be useful, and you will be valued. This conditioning runs deep. It is reinforced by family, education, and social rituals that reward compliance and punish resistance. But at some point, evidence accumulates. You look honestly at your own history, at how often loyalty was met with indifference, how often your flexibility invited exploitation rather than appreciation, how frequently your silence was mistaken for consent. Something breaks, not in anger, in clarity. You realize that much of what you called kindness was not chosen. It was fear disguised as virtue, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as difficult. There is a difference between generosity and self-erasure. The world rarely teaches that distinction. As this realization settles in, your behavior changes in small but alarming ways. You stop cushioning your refusals. You stop inventing excuses to protect other people from disappointment. When something does not align with your priorities, you say no, and you let the word stand on its own. This shocks people. They tell you that you have changed, that you have become colder, less considerate. What they are responding to is not cruelty. It is the loss of access. They were accustomed to negotiating your boundaries. Now they encounter resistance. This is the death of the so-called nice version of you. Not kindness itself, but compulsory kindness. Not empathy, but submission. A different form of discipline replaces it. You begin to choose discomfort over dishonesty. You address problems early instead of letting them rot into resentment. You are willing to have conversations that end relationships rather than prolong delusions. This feels brutal at first. It contradicts everything you were taught about being a good person. But over time, something stabilizes. Your words become precise. Your decisions become cleaner. Your life sheds excess weight. You are no longer negotiating with every expectation placed upon you. This is not recklessness. It is prioritization. You start to understand that every yes carries a cost. Time, energy, attention. These are finite resources. Guarding them is not selfish. It is strategic. Those who built their identity around your availability react strongly. Some attempt guilt. Others attempt nostalgia. They remind you of who you used to be. What they are really asking is whether they can continue to benefit from the old arrangement. You decline, quietly, firmly. This is the first fracture between you and the world as it was. The moment you stop confusing goodness with weakness, and once that fracture appears, it widens. Because a man who no longer seeks approval is difficult to pressure, and pressure is the foundation of control. After the first fracture, something subtler begins to emerge. It is not confidence, it is not detachment, it is control. You notice a delay where there used to be reflex. An event occurs, an insult, a provocation, a loss. And instead of reacting, you pause. For most men, emotion is an order. Anger demands expression. Fear demands avoidance. Desire demands pursuit. They live at the mercy of stimulus, pulled from one reaction to the next, exhausted by forces they never chose. You begin to step out of that current. The space between what happens and what you do widens. Inside that space, something solid forms. You observe your emotions without obeying them. This is not numbness. Numbness is collapse. This is discipline. You begin to treat feeling as information rather than instruction, a signal, not a command. When irritation arises, you register it. When anxiety surfaces, you examine it. When anger appears, you contain it. You no longer confuse intensity with truth. This shift makes you difficult to read. People test you unconsciously. They poke, provoke, exaggerate, hoping to locate your edges. They expect defensiveness. They expect explanation. They expect escalation. Instead, they encounter silence, not emptiness, stillness. This unsettles them. Most social power depends on emotional leverage. Manipulation works only when reactions are predictable. Guilt requires responsiveness. Shame requires compliance. Intimidation requires fear. When those levers fail, influence collapses. You begin to see this clearly. You recognize patterns you once fell into automatically. The passive-aggressive remark designed to bait you. The emotional display meant to extract reassurance. The manufactured urgency meant to override your judgment. You do not confront these tactics directly. You simply do not respond to them. This is the fox's intelligence, not force, but awareness, not domination, but evasion. You stop rushing to fill silence. You let pauses stretch. You allow conversations to become uncomfortable. In negotiation, this alone shifts power. The one who speaks less reveals less. The one who waits longer decides more. Your voice slows, your posture settles. Your attention becomes deliberate. In moments of crisis, something remarkable happens. Where you once asked why this was happening to you, you now ask what the situation requires. The narrative collapses into logistics. You stop dramatizing pain. You start managing reality. Loss becomes a problem to solve. Conflict becomes a structure to analyze. Chaos becomes terrain. This is the formation of an internal anchor. External turbulence no longer dictates your behavior. You remain inside yourself, even as pressure rises. People misinterpret this. They call it coldness, detachment, arrogance. What they are sensing is autonomy. A man who cannot be emotionally hijacked cannot be steered easily, and power depends on steering. This is the still center. Once established, it does not leave. It becomes the point from which every decision is made, and from that point, illusions begin to fall away. Once the still center forms, perception sharpens. You begin to notice something unsettling. The figures you once admired no longer appear elevated. The authority they carried starts to feel thin, almost theatrical. This is not bitterness. It is gravity. When you were younger, you looked upward instinctively. Parents, leaders, experts, lovers, public figures, all placed slightly above you in the imagination. They seemed certain, completed, different. Now the distance collapses. You see hesitation behind confidence, insecurity behind aggression, self-interest behind virtue. The pedestal cracks. This process is not cynical, but surgical. You are not tearing anyone down. You are simply removing the glow. People become legible. A father becomes a man who made decisions under pressure, often guessing. A boss becomes a nervous administrator protecting his position. A celebrated figure becomes a human being amplified by timing and circumstance. Most transformative of all, desire loses its illusion. You stop projecting meaning onto others. Romantic obsession dissolves into recognition. Attraction remains, but worship disappears. This is Desacralization. The world loses its false divinity. Once this happens, your relationship to authority changes permanently. You no longer submit instinctively. You assess. When someone raises their voice, you do not feel smaller. You notice leverage. You read motive. You observe fear masquerading as dominance. This makes you dangerous, not because you challenge authority recklessly, but because you are no longer hypnotized by it. Most systems rely on reverence. Titles, rituals, credentials, these are spells cast to suspend disbelief. When disbelief returns, the spell breaks. You begin to engage others. Negotiation replaces obedience. Strategy replaces submission. This shift extends into intimacy. Where others perform to be desired, you remain present. Where others overinvest, you maintain balance. You no longer attempt to earn affection through self-abandonment. And paradoxically, this steadiness draws people toward you. Not because you seek them, but because you are no longer chasing. You see incentives clearly now. You understand that most behavior is driven not by virtue, but by advantage. This knowledge does not make you cruel, it makes you precise. You stop arguing with illusions. You stop appealing to ideals that no one truly follows. You deal with what is. At this stage, you are no longer a spectator of power. You are participating consciously. You see the strings. You see the exchanges. You see the cost of pretending not to see. And once you see clearly, there is no return to innocence, only movement forward. After illusions fall, expression changes. You speak less. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understand the cost of saying too much. In a world addicted to visibility, silence feels like absence. People narrate every thought, broadcast every intention, announce every desire. They confuse exposure with authenticity. You no longer do. You begin to notice how often words are used defensively, how speech becomes a substitute for action, how plans dissolve the moment they are shared. So you withdraw your voice, not from fear, from calculation. You stop explaining your decisions to people who have no stake in the outcome. You stop advertising goals that are still fragile. You stop turning pain into performance. This is not secrecy for its own sake. It is containment. Information is leverage. Every detail revealed becomes a variable someone else can exploit. You become selective. When asked about your direction, you offer little. When challenged, you do not rush to clarify. When misunderstood, you do not correct immediately. This unsettles people. They are accustomed to reading intentions through language. When language disappears, imagination fills the gap. They begin projecting their own anxieties onto you, their own fears, their own expectations. Silence becomes a mirror. In negotiations, this shifts gravity. The one who speaks less exposes less. The one who waits gains time. You learn to sit comfortably inside, pauses, to let tension breathe, to allow others to reveal themselves while you remain still. Your past undergoes the same treatment. You stop recounting struggles for sympathy. You do not narrate trauma to establish credibility, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer needs an audience. The world is not a confessional. It is an arena, and in arenas, wounds are kept covered. You begin to work unseen. While others announce intentions, you build quietly. While they seek validation, you refine. While they argue, you execute. Then, without warning, something changes. You emerge altered. New skills, new leverage, new position. Those who were watching from the outside feel disoriented. They thought you were idle. They mistook silence for stagnation. This is the discipline of the void. Silence is not emptiness. It is incubation. Those who cannot endure it seek noise. Those who can, grow. And as this pattern stabilizes, another realization surfaces, one that disturbs even you. You are no longer harmless. At some point, you stop pretending that aggression does not exist. For years, you were taught to suppress it, to moralize it away, to associate it only with chaos, cruelty, or failure. You were told that being civilized meant being incapable of harm, but something inside you has begun to contradict that lesson. You feel strength returning not as rage, but as readiness. You recognize that beneath restraint must live capacity. Without it, restraint is meaningless. A man who cannot defend himself is not peaceful, he is compliant. This realization unsettles you, because it challenges the version of goodness you inherited. It forces you to look directly at impulses you once buried. Anger, drive, territorial instinct. The desire to dominate circumstances rather than endure them. You do not indulge these impulses recklessly. You integrate them. There is a difference. Integration means ownership, control, direction. You stop apologizing for your physicality, for your ambition, for your appetite to test limits. This shift often begins in the body. You seek resistance, weight, impact, discomfort, not because you want violence, but because you want certainty. Knowing that you could act if necessary changes how you move through the world. Your posture settles, your voice lowers, your eyes stop searching for permission. You no longer posture because you no longer need to prove anything. The men who bark the loudest do so because they doubt themselves. Those who know their edge remain quiet. This integration alters your energy. Your anger becomes fuel rather than poison. Your pride becomes a standard rather than vanity. Your selfishness becomes a boundary rather than a flaw. You harness what once threatened to control you. This is the monster brought into discipline, not eliminated, trained. A man without this integration is easy to exploit. He relies on morality to protect him. But morality without power invites violation. You understand now that ethics only function when backed by capacity. You are not becoming brutal. You are becoming formidable, and this makes you calm. Because when you know where your edge is, you do not need to test it constantly. Others feel this without understanding it. They sense that confrontation would be costly, not because you seek it, but because you are prepared for it. This is not about fighting. It is about presence. A man who has integrated his edge does not need to threaten. His restraint speaks for him. And as this presence stabilizes, your relationship with time changes. Once the edge is integrated, waste becomes intolerable. You begin to notice how casually most people bleed their lives away. Hours dissolve into distraction. Attention fragments across arguments, entertainment, and obligations that return nothing. You feel resistance to this. Not moral resistance. Strategic resistance. Your relationship with time hardens. You stop treating it as something to be filled. You treat it as something to be invested. Before you commit energy, a question forms automatically. Will this strengthen me, sharpen me, or expand my position? If the answer is unclear, you decline. This decision alone separates you from most men. They scatter themselves. You consolidate. You withdraw from noise that offers stimulation without consequence. News cycles, endless commentary, conflicts that exist only to consume attention. You recognize that outrage is a tax, and most people pay it willingly. You stop arguing to be right. You stop engaging to be seen. You stop explaining yourself to audiences who do not matter. This makes you appear boring, detached, unavailable. Let them think so. What they call boring is focus they cannot access. While others are entertained, you are compounding. While they debate, you are drilling fundamentals. While they chase novelty, you are deepening leverage. Your life begins to narrow, but in the way a blade narrows. There is less motion, but more force. People around you feel the distance growing. They sense that you are pulling ahead. This creates friction. They question your intensity. They label your discipline as obsession. They attempt to soften you back into the average. This is predictable. Your existence becomes uncomfortable because it reflects choices they avoided making. You are not judging them, but your trajectory does. You understand opportunity cost now. Every yes is a theft from something else. You choose deliberately. This focus accelerates everything. Skills sharpen faster. Judgment improves. Results stack. From the outside it looks sudden. From the inside it feels inevitable. This economy of focus is not asceticism. It is sovereignty. You are no longer spending your life. You are deploying it. And as your circle tightens, something else happens. The noise fades. And in that quiet, you confront the final condition of power. When focus becomes non-negotiable, companionship changes. Not dramatically at first, just gradually. You begin to notice how many connections were built on shared distraction rather than shared direction. How often proximity replaced alignment. How many conversations existed only to fill silence. As your life tightens around purpose, those bonds loosen. You spend more time alone. At first, this feels like loss. Then something unexpected happens. The silence stops threatening you. Most men fear being alone because solitude forces confrontation with doubt, with regret, with the parts of themselves they drowned out with noise. You stop running. You discover that isolation is not emptiness. It is clarity without interference. Your best thinking happens here. Your strategies sharpen here. Your nervous system finally rests. You no longer need constant input to validate your reality. You trust your own perception. This is sovereignty. You become less reactive to social pressure because exile no longer frightens you. The threat loses its force once you accept it voluntarily. If approval is removed, you remain intact. If affiliation dissolves, you continue. This is why solitude has always been a crucible of power. Those who can endure it gain something irreversible, independence of mind. You no longer need consensus to act. You no longer seek reassurance before deciding. You no longer outsource judgment to the group. This does not make you antisocial. It makes you selective. You welcome others freely, but you do not cling. You collaborate, but you do not depend. Your presence becomes gravitational rather than needy. People feel it. They sense that you are complete without them, that you are choosing connection rather than requiring it. And this, paradoxically, draws respect. But solitude extracts payment. You cannot unsee what you now see. Which brings us to the final truth, the one most men never reach. The cost. There is no return from this. Once you understand power, you cannot go back to innocence. You will always notice incentives behind words. You will always recognize manipulation when it appears. You will always see the structure beneath behavior. This awareness is heavy. It means comfort no longer comes from ignorance. Peace no longer comes from illusion. You cannot pretend systems are benevolent when you understand how they function. You cannot play naive when you see the game. You will often feel alone in rooms full of people, because you are operating on a different layer of reality. This is the tax of consciousness. Most men avoid it. They choose safety over clarity, belonging over autonomy, harmlessness over capacity. You did not. That does not make you better. It makes you responsible, because power without awareness is chaos, and awareness without discipline is madness. You must now carry both. You are no longer harmless, but you are not reckless. You are capable and controlled. This is what separates kings from monsters. The world does not need more agreeable men. It has plenty. It needs men who can confront disorder without becoming it, who can hold force without abusing it, who can stand alone without collapsing. You are not becoming something unnatural. You are becoming what has always existed beneath the conditioning. A man who chooses his actions consciously, who owns his shadow, who understands the cost of power and pays it willingly. This path will never be crowded. That is the point.